Ready?
Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and if anyone would like to sign up for public comment, please do so in the chat. All yours, Evelyn.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Lots of numbers to review today. So Pamela, welcome back.
Thanks.
Let me start with the opening statement. The trustees of the Boston Public, Jay, do you want to flip it?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can you slide? There we go.
There we go. The trustees of the Boston Public Library reaffirm our commitment to racial equity and to the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion more broadly. The library is formally committed to becoming an anti-racist organization in response to systemic racism, inequity, and injustice prevalent in our society. We acknowledge also that our Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem, providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and it's a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context of our planning, deliberations, and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. Emily, first meeting, welcome.
Good morning, thank you.
All right, roll call for the minutes, please, Pamela.
Sorry. Arano Ortiz,
Here.
Baal,
Here.
Hyler will be joining. I'm not sure if he's on right now. Hyler?
I do see a phone number.
Okay, can you please open that? That's probably John Hyler, if it begins with the numbers 331.
Yes.
Okay, that's Mr. Hyler.
John, I'm promoting you.
John, can you just confirm for the record? And Jay, can you change his name so that it doesn't reflect his phone number for me? I know that is John. John, can you just open your mic? All right, moving on. Leonard?
Here.
And Rush is absent. All right, we have a quorum.
You forgot me.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay, guys,
Jeff
can you hear me now?
Yes, I just
Hello?
confirmed Hyler and Hawkins. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that, guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. All right, first item on the agenda, we have our auditors with our audited financials. Kyle, welcome to our meeting. Why is this camera keep moving? Here we go.
Morning.
Good morning.
You want to
Kyle, if you could just say next slide to advance the slides, and our IT administrator will do that for you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That works great. Actually, I have control to do it too. So thank you for that. Good morning, everyone. Great to be back with you again this year. This is our second year working with the library. So we are going to be reviewing the 2023 audited financial statements. Certainly feel free to ask questions at any time. I'll be happy to help. To start, obviously the transition of Ellen to Emily occurred. Emily was great, had an open door with us immediately. We met with her early and often. And so just want to say thank you to her for helping the transition be very smooth from an audit perspective. Certainly working on the day-to-day with Sean and Eunice didn't change. They're fantastic. They got us everything that we needed almost immediately. So it's a quick turnaround from June 30 to have an audited set of financial statements available in September. It's a lot of work. It's a heavy lift for everyone. So just wanted to say thank you to your finance team and just let you know how great they were to work with. If you were to read through our financial statements, you'd note that we are issuing a clean audit opinion, which means that the financial figures are free of material misstatements, in our opinion. We really had limited journal entries this year proposed, if any, really, other than GASB 96, which I'll get into. So hopefully that means the month-to-month information that you're receiving from your finance team is clear and accurate, because it was for us from an audit perspective at year end. Overall, the library's net position increased about 2.4 million. Majority of that is directly related to the gains on investments. As you'll see, or as you're probably aware, 2022 was a down year for all markets, and the library holds a significant amount of investments, and that thankfully bounced back in 2022. I think there was a good sized loss last year and about a $5 million, little over $5 million increase in investment gains in 2023 compared to 2022. There was also increases in the DeFerrari Trust of just under 300,000, and the fund for BPL had an increase of just under $500,000. Yeah, I think with COVID, and I know this is a slide that we shared in the prior year, something similar, is important to get an idea of the trends of the different revenue streams for the library. And obviously, you know, items like special events and fees dropped down significantly going through the COVID-19 period. And I like to think we're beyond that, and I think that the increases in revenues in those line items is representative of that too. So events bounce back, fees are bounced back, and so obviously the intergovernmental has been, which is the funds from the city and the state, has been relatively consistent, but important to get an idea and just understand that the trends are back in the right direction.
Kelly, with this diagram, I just want to note that you have a reverse timeline here, so people should be just careful about reading the direction of the trend lines.
Oh yes, I apologize. Yes, 2023 is on the left-hand side for each of the graphs. I should have.
I noticed that. I was like, wait, everything's declining.
Yeah, I had the same moment of panic, but then I looked at the actual axis.
Yeah.
So
I apologize for that. The same is true on this slide too. It's reverse. But as you can see, 2022 was a down year from an investment income perspective, and certainly bounced back in 2023, which is great to see. The library's general fund had an increase of 144,000, with unassigned fund balance of 685,000. Typically, when we look at unassigned fund balance for a municipal entity, a range of 8 to 16% of your operating expenditures is what's targeted as considered to be healthy. The unassigned portion is at 4.9%, so a little bit lower than that. But when you look at your assigned fund balance, which is the number that jumped up quite a bit, of just over 2.5 million, and you combine those two together, it's a very healthy fund balance to be at. Assigned fund balance just means that they're funds that are not externally restricted. There's not a grantor saying that you've got to spend it on a certain cost. It's just internally designated. So I think there was quite a bit of money that's assigned, about $1 million for some IT equipment, $500,000 for furniture, and some money for salaries as well. So very fluid. You're able to move those funds around without any restrictions. So that's why I think it's important to look at them in totality when you're comparing fund balance to your operating expenditures. Overall, the fund balance for the general fund has remained consistent and has had relatively consistent gains. That dark blue portion is what we call the unassigned portion, compared to the total. That has obviously gone down a bit, but again, that's in hand with the designations for certain equipment pieces. And again, that goes left to right as well. So if you were looking at this year's financial statements compared to prior years, not much has changed from a financial statement presentation standpoint, with the exception of a new standard this year, GASB 96, which is the subscription-based information technology agreements. Last year was leases, and there was a few leases and lease receivables that were added to the financial statements. This year it's SBITAs, and basically it's any long-term contracts that the library has with IT agreements or IT providers. So it's BiblioCommons, it was OC, LC, and Innovative were all determined to be long-term contracts. The library added those as an asset, an intangible asset to your capital assets that's being amortized over the next 3 years, and also as a liability. So you'll see that as both an asset and a liability that you wouldn't have seen in the prior year. The financial statement portion of the audit is one piece. And I think just as significant, if not more significant, is our review of the internal control processes of the library. Certainly looking at all the significant transaction cycles, cash receipts, cash disbursements, payroll, financial reporting, and certainly too with the transition from Ellen to Emily, we maintain professional skepticism as we're walking through your internal control processes, and if there was anything significant of note, segregation of duties issues somewhere where we felt like there was a significant hole, we would bring that to your attention. And I'm happy to note that we did not come up with any findings to report to you this year. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Certainly.
Kyle, hi, it's Nevji. I'm sorry for being off camera. The long-term information technology contracts, can you just help me understand what the impact of that is? What is it that we're trying to highlight there?
Yeah, absolutely. So GASB 96 basically said, if you have an IT agreement with someone who you have a contract with that you're going to be with for a significant amount of time, that piece of that agreement, so what you're using is actually, it's an asset to the library. And they have it amortized over time. So it's almost like the same as if you were to pick up a piece of equipment that you purchased, the useful life of which would be, say, 5 years, you depreciate it over that 5 years. It's the same, it's just an intangible asset under the new GASB standard.
And how do you value it? At the cost of the contract, or?
It's actually the net present value of future payments. So we digested the contracts that the library had. We determined what the payments would be over the next 3 years and took the net present value using the library's incremental borrowing rate, which I think was 3%.
Yeah, the way that I rationalize that is that, nowadays everything is cloud-based, so you're not actually buying physical equipment. So some of that subscription is also paying for physical hardware that otherwise would be hosted at your site. So it actually makes sense to me that is a new, something that you need to report on, because in actuality, you're not buying the equipment, but actually portion of that subscription gets allocated to hardware.
Got it. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, Kyle, just for the official record, I want to note that the financial analysis provided here pertains to the business of the trustees as its own corporation, whereas the totality of the financial picture includes the library operating as a city department, which is not part of the scope of this audit. So in some ways, it is the part that this body is fiscally responsible for, but not the entirety of the financial picture of the library.
All right. Any more questions for Kyle? And the only question I have, Kyle, is when I know that after the financials, there's the management letter, and when can we expect that to come out?
Yeah, so we're waiting on final financial statements from the fund. And I think we have a draft at this point, and I'm expecting that to go final early this week.
Okay.
And I think you could expect it shortly thereafter.
All right, excellent. Any more questions around the audited financials?
No, but it was great to hear the transition over, and thank you guys for updating us on that, because whenever you have such a big switch and to hear everything was in great shape and still in great shape, it just makes us all feel pretty comfortable. So thanks for relaying that.
Absolutely.
All right. And I know that Ellen has been made herself available during this period as well. So I know she couldn't make the call, so I appreciate Ellen as well, and Emily for making sure that it's a smooth transition overall. All right.
Exactly.
So we need to take a vote to recommend the statements to go in front of the full board for final approval. So
Next slide. Jay, can you advance the slide?
It is, the vote is not the next slide. Sorry, I'm scrolling through trying to
Oh,
find
sorry. So I'll read the vote.
this. Nope.
No,
Sorry.
no, it's not here. I'll read it. Voted that the trustees, finance and audit committee of the public library of the city of Boston recommend the board of trustees approve the Boston Library's, this is a mouthful, Boston Public Library draft audited financial statements for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023. That's the vote. So can I please get a motion?
So moved.
Second,
Second,
do you need a roll call, Pamela?
Yes, please, if that's okay.
Roll call?
Ron Ortiz,
Yes.
Val,
Yes.
Tyler,
yes.
Hawkins,
Yes.
Leonard,
Yes.
so moved.
Pamela, we didn't do the public before we move into NEPC. Thank you, Kyle. We didn't do the public announcement of any public comments. Please sign up on the chat.
I did that in the beginning when I announced the recording.
Oh, okay. So just want to remind everyone.
Second reminder, there we go.
Reminder, there we go. All right. Well,
Thanks,
thank you,
everybody. Have a
Kyle.
good day. Thank you.
Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you, Kyle.
All right. Do we need to promote Sebastian?
No, he's on.
He's on?
Jay, do you want me to move the slides?
That would be wonderful. I actually need to go set up Brad for another event.
Okay. There we go. Sebastian, you are good to go.
Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And let me see if my camera's going to work. And Evelyn, if you can get me a promotion, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.
Who do I need to talk to?
We can talk offline. It's great seeing everyone. We do have Alex Sollers on the line with me as well. And really for today, we just have an update for you, a quick review of the markets and what's been happening there, as well as a rebalancing recommendation. And traditionally what we've done is looked at rebalancing as part of spending, but the markets have moved in our favor. So we want to take a little bit off the top and rebalance throughout the portfolio. But with that, what I'll do is I'll turn it over to Alex and she'll walk you through performance through July. We don't have the August numbers just yet, as well as the rebalancing recommendations.
Thank you, Sebastian, and good morning, everybody. On this slide, this is a snapshot of your portfolio performance and asset allocation through the end of July 2023. At the top, you'll see total plan performance over the trailing time periods, 1 month, year to date, and trailing 1, 3, 5, and 10-year periods. For the 1 month ending July 31st, 2023, your plan returned 2.4%, slightly outperforming the 60/40 index. Over a longer term, performance remains strong on both an absolute and benchmark relative basis. Over the year to date, we saw a little bit of benchmark relative challenged performance, 9.4% strong absolute return. However, it slightly underperformed the 60/40 benchmark by 210 basis points. And this was largely attributed to just manager selection within the EM equity space and US small cap just over the year to date period, but performance remains strong for those areas of your portfolio over the longer period and no concerns really there. Right below that chart on the left-hand side, you'll see the current year-to-date change in cash flows and market value. You began the year at $64.2 million. We saw net cash flows, outflows of about $4 million and investment earnings of about $5 million, bringing you to $65.3 million at the end of July. Below that, you'll see just a snapshot of your asset allocation versus the policy. And as Sebastian mentioned, we saw some market movements, especially within the equity space. So you'll notice here that your portfolio is slightly overweight US large cap equity or US equity and emerging markets equity, given that market performance we've seen. And we will follow up with a rebalance on the following pages that will help move the portfolio closer to those strategic long-term targets and also capture some of those gains that Sebastian had mentioned. On the next slide, we showcase the your plan performance. So this is just a snapshot of all your managers through July. As mentioned, performance has been strong over all the time periods measured, but looking a little bit deeper at your managers, you'll notice in the year-to-date column, everything is positive on an absolute basis. So strong performance year-to-date. As mentioned, the US large cap markets did extremely well on a year-to-date basis. The S&P 500 index, for example, is up about 21%, and the MSCI World up 18% through July. So on the next page, if there's no questions about specific managers, we can just briefly touch on our recommended rebalancing. So we're recommending moving about 1.5 million from equities to capture the gains seen year to date and rebalance the portfolio into your long-term strategic targets by moving that 1.5 million towards fixed income and multi-asset. So about 700,000 will come from US equity large cap, 400,000 from the SSGA index product, and then about 300,000 from Diamond Hill large cap. And then we're also recommending an 800,000 pull from Earnest International Equity, and we'll be recommending moving those assets into fixed income and multi-asset, 400,000 apiece to SSGA Treasuries, Manulife, and Vanguard, short corporate, and the remaining 300,000 to PIMCO All Asset. And that will get you closer to those strategic long-term approved targets. So I'll pause here to see if there's any question on portfolio performance or the rebalancing recommendation before passing to Sebastian to talk more about the markets.
Questions? I actually want to hear about the markets before talking.
Yeah, I think that would be good timing. Yeah, Evelyn, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, so let's talk markets and then come back to rebalancing.
Perfect. And I will say, Alex told me to do markets first, and I said, no, we can follow this agenda. We'll get through it.
I tell you.
No, it's been an interesting time. And if we actually stay on this slide right here, there was a ton of information beyond this, but at a high level, this is what's been driving results in 2023 thus far. If we look at the global economic situation and then here at home, there's been a lot of resilience. And if you think about when we met late last year, earlier this year, a lot of the talk was, well, what's going to happen in 2023 with the Fed? What's going to happen with inflation, with the consumer? Are we going to see a hard landing? Are we going to see a soft landing? Are we going to see continued rate hikes? Are we going to see a pullback? And clearly, everyone's crystal ball was all over the place because where we are today is that the economy is still humming right along, probably beyond expectations, which is a good thing. So we're still seeing positive growth from a GDP perspective. We're still seeing a strong consumer. We're seeing inflation that is trending in the right direction, although last month it ticked up a little bit. And you see a Fed that's been pivoting to a wait and see approach as a result. But if we continue to see some of the numbers that we've seen here recently, there is likely that there will be another 25 basis point move before the end of the year. So when you have an environment such as that, it becomes challenging because the expectation is that at some point, things will slow down. We will see a pullback, but it's a matter now of when. And if we do see that, that means the Fed has to pivot from their current tightening cycle stance into a more easing posture. So in the US, what you're seeing is a relatively robust market. And as a result, that's been driven by a number of stocks when we think about it from a return perspective. So your mega cap names, your Amazons, your Nvidias, your Netflixes, your Googles, Apples of the world have driven results in the S&P and the large cap markets this year. It's really been a very narrow market. It's been one where these 5 stocks have in effect returned 80% of that S&P return. So really everything else that's within that index has been roughly or relatively mediocre if you kind of think about it. So when we're thinking about rebalancing and where we should place that next dollar or rebalance from, US equities have had a fantastic run thus far. It makes sense for us to pull that back a little bit and rebalance to other parts of the portfolio. Where do we want to rebalance to? High yield. On a relative basis and from a risk premium perspective, equity risk premiums, and what that means is what you earn for taking on that risk of equities has compressed. And other areas such as fixed income because of where rates are today, and in particular high yield and shorter dated high yield and corporate securities have become much more attractive because their yield component is very, very high relative to history on an absolute basis. So when we're looking at that incremental shift, this is sort of the balancing act that we're trying to pull. You know, let's take some off of equities, which have had a fantastic run. Let's add it to an area of the portfolio that's seeing higher yields and we should be benefiting from that on a go-forward basis. And then the last part of this is because we do have higher rates in fixed income, having a little bit of liquidity in terms of cash or treasury exposure is perfectly fine because we're being paid for it. You know, this is not the days of 3 or 4 years ago where rates were near zero, and you want it to be in other asset classes to earn that incremental return. So from a balancing act, we're being quite, I don't want to say it's conservative because that's not the right term, but we're being balanced in terms of what the approach is. There certainly is tailwind for us to continue down the path of where we are. I think from a risk perspective, we've sort of moved down to thinking that we're probably going to see a soft landing, or at least we're in the camp of potentially seeing a soft landing where the Fed's doing just enough not to completely stop the economy, but to slow it down enough to meet its goals of that 2 or so % inflation level at some point over the next year or so. You know, if you look globally, you have other challenges, right? If we think Europe is still in a bit of a different position than us. Growth is still stagnating, inflation is higher. They're not seeing some of the same tailwinds that we're seeing for a number of reasons. And then in the emerging market arena, you know, China has had fits and starts throughout the year, and that's really been the driver of performance. You know, for your managers who do have exposure there, any overweight to China has actually been a detractor. Any underweight to China has generally been positive. And there's been a pivot towards India as being sort of the growth engine going forward, at least in the near term. So it's really a difference depending on where you're looking globally. But if we're thinking about where we would put those dollars to work, you know, today we're saying, let's keep it in the US. There seems to be a little bit more of a growth story today. Let's underweight international equity, so earnest to the point of pulling back some of the gains that we've seen there. And let's rebalance other areas where we're not necessarily losing return because the yield is so attractive that it makes sense for us to take advantage of that.
It's Sebastian, what would Ernest be saying right now on the rebalancing? You know, if you were to ask them, of course, they're going to say, you know,
it's a buying opportunity.
What would be their
Yeah, no, for them, it's a buying opportunity. Things are cheap in Europe, right? They are a developed non-US manager. They will have some emerging markets exposure. And for them, you know, they are seeing pressures on some of the underlying stocks that you're invested in. So, you know, there is something to be said about that for sure. But as they've actually outperformed their benchmark pretty handily this year. They're up about 16% relative to about 13 for the index. So right sizing that position, I think, makes sense. I just think it's been a nice run there, and we're not saying terminate or anything like that. We're just saying just trim off the top. But John, to your point, you know, Europe from an active manager's perspective seems cheap, right? You do have some opportunities there because of the pressures that the continent has faced over the last 3 or 4 years. That there are some good buying opportunities for sure. So we don't want to eliminate exposure, just trim the gains that we've seen.
Thanks.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, from a perspective of why things are pointing in so many different directions, if we move up 4 slides, you may have seen this chart from us. It's the one with a lot of arrows pointing in different directions. One more. All of the data points are pointing at something else. And this is what makes it tough as an allocator and as an investor, because from a perspective, if we're looking at the GDP of the United States, it's made up of goods and services. And on the whole, the goods part of the GDP the goods part of the market is, you can say, is in a recession. And the demand has dropped. Manufacturing is a bit challenged. The cost of inputs has gone up. But the services sector, you know, going to grab a coffee, having lunch somewhere, you know, going to a store, a movie, what have you, that's still very much in demand. And that's what's been driving a lot of the growth that we've been seeing, and hence pointing towards a little bit of a different outcome than some of the other areas. And then you look at these no landing scenarios, right? Sentiment, labor market, labor continues to be high, which is great. We have low unemployment. You know, but that does create headwinds when it comes to thinking through whether inflation stays higher or lower as we continue to go down that path. So this is something that we monitor on a quarterly basis, on a regular basis, and adjust our views accordingly. And as I mentioned, as we're looking at the markets today, the big thing is that we do think that with equities being so narrow, especially in the US, it does make sense to lighten up and rebalance there. And the natural spots for us at the moment are more on the yield-seeking side, or assets that have a higher carry than what you will see in the equity markets. So beyond this, there are a couple
yeah, Sebastian, real quickly on the big
Sure.
overhang of Washington and Congress and just all of the, there's still a couple of those big things that are hanging out there.
Yep.
How much do you guys, because I like what you're talking about right now, because I do think there's so much contradictory numbers, views, and I think what you're doing is proper and consistent with what our goals are here on the portfolio. But what are some of the other bigger things? And we got the election coming up. We also have a very
the debt ceiling
right now. So
yeah.
So I'm just wondering, and that's the one thing that concerns me more than anything.
Sure, and these are some of the I don't want to call them left tail events, because honestly, they are things that are predictable, that could be talked through, that could be negotiated and approved way ahead of time. But you're right. I mean, it's Congress can't get anything done with where they are today. So I think from a foreseeable future, I mean, that's the biggest question mark is, as we head towards the next couple of weeks, whether or not we're going to have another, debt showdown or debt ceiling showdown like we had earlier this summer. And clearly we did get to some type of resolution there, but it was pretty last second, and it did cause a lot of variability in the markets as we were leading up to that. As we move through the next couple of months here, it's going to be the same thing. I know that there was some type of a package passed at the House level. Whether or not that actually makes it through the Senate is to be seen. But that's something the markets are going to focus on. Ultimately, the view is that cooler heads prevail, and we do know that it's in the best interest for us to move forward with some of these solutions. It would be nice to have a longer term solution rather than having these stopgap solutions every 3 months that we talk about. But I don't see that as likely given the current makeup of both houses. But so that's in the near term, that's the biggest question mark that could cause some variability for us, John. It's what happens in DC, whether or not they are able to pass some type of a spending / budget deal again. And the more uncertainty that we have around that, the more variability you'll see in the market. I think the other piece is, whether you're looking at equity markets, fixed income markets, things are largely pricing in that we're pretty much at peak rates from a Fed perspective. There's not much of an expectation that we'll see many more, if any more moves, and that at some point in 2024, we're likely to see some type of a pullback, whether that's a significant recession or a minor recession, but likely some type of a pullback and slowdown. The question mark becomes, from here going forward, from an inflationary perspective, is August a blip? And when we see the September numbers, the October, November, December numbers, we'll see those normalize to a lower level again, or are those going to continue to remain stubbornly high, or higher, I should say, on a relative basis? Because if that's the case, that means the Fed's not done. That means we're going to continue to see some type of tightening and continue to see some type of a movement on rates. And clearly that puts a damper again on risk assets. As you're earning 5.5%, 6% on short-term treasuries or fixed income, that becomes a lot more attractive than trying to earn that in an equity. So it does pose a little bit of a challenge there as we're looking at that to head out the year. And then next year, as you mentioned, it's sort of fair game in an election year. Typically, you do see a ton of volatility in an election year, and it's starting. I mean, we're seeing it already in terms of what's happening out there. So more to come on that one. That one's a little bit of a wild card. I can't really even speak to today. But I think just as we're looking for the rest of this year, look at inflation, look at what the Fed does, see what's happening in Washington from a debt perspective. Those would be sort of the key items that will drive a little bit of return in the coming months.
All right, final question, I hope, from me, sorry. The banking issues, real estate, that overhang on the economy, and some of the outlooks that I've read from CEOs and on the corporate side hasn't been that overly positive. But can you touch a little bit just on the banking, whether it's regional or from the bigger
Sure.
money center banks and how that might affect?
So the big thing with money center banks and the regional banks are the largest lender in the country, right? So they're the ones who are putting that money to work, lending to, you know, you and me and everyone else on this call. So if they see pressure and they're unable to or they're unwilling to, that will slow down the economy naturally. And you know, a lot of this comes from what happened with SVB earlier this year and First Republic going under, and concerns about whether or not that would cause some kind of a contagion. So there, it's something we have to watch, but things have generally stabilized on that front, where that is not as much of a concern, but it's definitely in the back of our minds. It's something to consider. The larger banks seem to be in pretty good standing today as well. You know, they are becoming a bigger part, and there are fewer of them, so that's something just to watch as we look forward. But the lending, especially that lending activity, that'll be the key input that we have to look at, whether or not it's stayed relatively stable or it's pulling back. Simply, if the funds are not available, liquidity is not available, that's a tightening feature on its own. From a commercial real estate perspective, office is front and center. The office market has seen a significant pullback in all regions around the country. You know, we're seeing it in the news almost every day. If you are seeing some type of transactions, they are at significant discounts to where they were just a few years ago, if happening at all. Many are downsizing. Many are rethinking what they need for space. You know, many are rethinking in cities, can you repurpose this? Can you repurpose these buildings for multifamily, for anything else? And you know, they weren't built for that use, and it becomes overly expensive to try and retrofit some of these into what could be of good use for the community. So that is something where we see at least another couple of quarters of pressure until valuations sort of bottom out. But even with that, from a valuation perspective, I still think that you're still going to see some pressures as we start to get back to some type of normalcy. And you know, you are hearing more and more that many of the corporations, including ones like Zoom, who thanks to them, we're having this call right now, want people back in the office, right? They want people to collaborate. They want people to see each other, et cetera. So on the one hand, you are seeing some desire to bring people back in. On the other hand, it's very slow, and it's not everywhere. I think one of the things that you've also seen as a result of everything that's happened over the last 3 or 4 years is that the office space that has been relatively successful has moved out of the big cities and closer to where their employees work in the suburbs. So kind of think these secondary markets outside of these large money center cities, if you will, for lack of a better term. But that still is certainly a concern. The retail part of it is a concern. There are other parts of real estate that are quite attractive: industrial, multifamily, you know, student housing. The industrial one is specifically very interesting because it supports a lot of the demographic trends that we've seen. So think last mile type warehouses. So the way that you get an Amazon package the same day or the next day is because there's a warehouse somewhere nearby that's able to do that for you. Data centers are another area that are quite interesting in that in order to support all of this usage of internet and everything else that we're seeing, the cloud AI, you need the servers, you need that infrastructure in place to be able to support that. So those are areas where we've seen actually a good amount of tailwinds in terms of opportunities. So it's definitely shifting a bit. And if you just think about it from a core real estate perspective, so you know, think about your big funds out there, your Morgan Stanley Primes or your Prudentials, et cetera. Many have been lightening up on office. It's just it's something that, you know, where they are in very call it Class A high demand areas, those buildings and those properties have fared well. But anything beyond that has probably seen less demand and has seen a bit more struggle. So it's as we talked, there are obviously a lot more things than I mentioned about inflation and the debt ceiling, et cetera, that are working themselves through. Some are a little bit further along, but nonetheless, that there's still not that foreseeable floor on especially real estate that we can point to and say, yes, you know, this is the bottom, and now we're going to see things turn around. I think there's still some uncertainty there.
Thank you.
Sebastian. Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thanks for the response.
Of course.
Sebastian, great summary. Thank you. Just one question, and I know this is always dangerous, right? Because we have our guidelines model portfolio for a reason. But given all that you've just said, did you take us to the edge of what you think is reasonable in terms of reallocation out of equity into fixed income, or is there more that we could do there? I mean, if you just look at our 7 and 10-year turn, right, we have a 6% return, which has served us well. We can get 5 today, just basically sitting in cash. I understand the yield curve is inverted, and that's a short duration. But is there something else you think we should be doing, or are you recommending sort of the edge of where we should go?
So I think we took you right back to your target asset allocation, the long-term targets. So we wanted to take some of those overweights off that you had in equity, again, capitalize on the growth there. We would take it a step further and actually be comfortable underweighting your overall equity allocation by a couple of percent. And again, moving that likely towards the Manulifes or the Vanguard short corporate. Again, just on a relative basis, the yield profile there is quite attractive. So if we were to take it a step further, so 1A for the rebalancing is what you see here, 1B would be, we'd be comfortable actually pulling a little bit more off the table with equities as well.
And what's the general sort of duration you guys are targeting on the shorter end of the fixed income allocation?
So on the shorter end, it's 1 to 3 years. On the overall portfolio level, we're starting to get to a point where we're getting back to neutral to benchmark. Because if we are starting to peak out at peak rates, the likelihood of us moving the other direction in the foreseeable future may be present. So we'd prefer to be closer to neutral at this point, so we can benefit from that if we do see a rate rally. The corporate, the short corporate allocation that you have here, think about that as almost an equity proxy, right? That was funded mostly through your equity exposure, a little bit of other rebalancing, but mostly through your equity exposure. And I would look at it as such. So it's really meant to be sort of a substitute, if you will. The rest of your fixed income allocation, IRNM, TIPS, the treasuries, Manulife will be shorter duration today. They're more credit-oriented manager. So we can look at that in totality, but the other 3 are going to be close to benchmark duration. So close to that intermediate 5, 5.5, 6 years that the market is at today.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
All right, any more questions? All right, I think in one of the slides I saw the vote to do the rebalancing. Do we want to go back to the rebalancing slide, please?
I believe it's slide 4.
All right. So basically what like you mentioned, Sebastian and Alex, just taking money out of the equity, US equity.
And a little bit of international as well.
Yep. International. And then actually kind of like almost half and half.
Pretty much. Yep.
And then moving it to fixed income.
Correct.
All right. Any questions around the rebalancing?
No, Evelyn, just real quick on our investment statement and looking at that, and I think Jeff just touched on it. Just making sure we're staying within our mandate and all of that. Every now and then we probably should just take a look at that and make sure it's something we're all still good with and all of that. And I know it's a solid one, but it's always something we may want to revisit at one of the meetings.
Mm-hmm. I think just to make one comment, Evelyn, and I don't want to interrupt. John, we'll have that for you right at the beginning of the year. We'll review the asset allocation, see if there are any changes warranted, et cetera. And then right post that, we'll update the policy statement for any changes that are needed from that discussion. So that's forthcoming.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good, thank you. All right, and all right, so if there's no questions around this, I think I saw a slide for the vote, because we need to take a quick vote on the approving.
Yes, I have a placeholder vote. I wasn't sure if you guys would be doing that. Let me get to it.
That's it.
Yep. So I just need to, the rebalance, I just need to clarify so that we know exactly what we're voting on. So would it be that you are voting to take, how much money is it overall, Sebastian, just so I know the amount?
$1.5 million.
All right, so it would be taking 1.5 million out of US equity and international and moving to fixed income?
Yep. That's correct. Yep. Yes,
David,
sorry.
Fixed income and multi-asset. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
All right. So can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All right, roll call?
Around Ortiz,
Yes.
Paul,
Yes.
Hyler,
Yes.
Hawkins,
Yes.
and Leonard. David,
David,
Yes.
the elusive mute button.
so moved.
All right. All right, next item, new business. Okay, I got new business.
Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Sebastian and Alex.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Alex.
Alex,
Thanks, guys.
was right. Never forget that, Sebastian. Alex was right
She was. It's on the record.
on the record. All right, thank you guys. All
Thank you
right,
guys very much.
thank you. Okay, I got new business. So here's new business. The BPL Bookies Open tournament, Franklin Park, 1 o'clock tea time, 9 holes. September the 27th, organized by our own Jane Sproul. So I have my trophy and I want to keep it. So I need some ringers. So let us know if you want to join us. September 27th.
Love to do it at a wedding, so I can't. It's my son getting married, so I can't miss that one this time.
That's an excuse. I don't know if that doesn't seem like a good excuse.
I don't know.
Awesome.
Wedding, golf, wedding. I don't know. Congratulations, John.
That's awesome, John.
Thanks. Yeah, it'll be fun.
It'll be fun. Well, maybe we crash the wedding after the tournament. Maybe we do that.
Oh, you got to fly to. You got to fly to Portugal.
Wow, that is fun. Well, nice. Very nice.
You kids don't do it easy anymore.
No, they don't.
If anyone needs any more details on that, it was in the BPL Weekly that was sent out last week.
Yeah. So, all right.
Pam's talking about the golf, not the wedding.
Pam's, as always, trying to get us back on track. Thank you, Pam.
All right. Do we have any public comment?
We do not.
We do not. All right. With that, we close it up. Thank you so much.
Good to see everyone. Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Congrats, John.
Nice meeting.
Congrats.
Good update. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Next
Bye-bye,
meeting
guys.
is on
Cheers.
next meeting is Halloween, just so everyone knows. And next week is our full board meeting in
On
person at the Central Library.
On costume. Excellent. All righty.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Next week is our full board.
Bye.